Hey there, and welcome back to Transformers Fall of Cybertron. As you no doubt know, today marked the release of the G2 Colors Combaticons for both Fall of Cybertron and Rise of the Dark Spark. This mod has easily been one of the most anticipated projects to finish, and it brings me great joy to see it completed at last. This video is going to be sort of a developer commentary that runs through each character and the process that went into making them. So if you're just interested in playing with the mod, you can get them in the link in the description. But if you're intrigued by the development process, then feel free to join me as I run through each character. Let's begin. Let's start off with the last character I finished, Swindle. Swindle is easily my favorite skin in the entirety of the mod. His camo job came together so beautifully in both modes and just complemented the design so wonderfully. Okay, so let's start with the main deal, the camo. For the majority of the camo used on all characters, I took samples from the G2 Combaticon textures, mainly Brawls, and positioned them on the body at various points which looked the most visually satisfying and contoured naturally with the body. Really, the camo work was the most involved part of the process. You cannot just slap a camo sample anywhere you want on the body and expect it to look good. You can't have too much, and you can't have too little, so striking a good balance throughout the entire design was very difficult, and it took many attempts before I even settled on what I have now. But the end result was well worth the effort. So my main inspiration for these characters was to base them off the G2 Combaticon skin itself. And I even tried to match some of the distinct camo marks in certain locations. But generally, I just stuck with what looked good. Aside from the camo job, it is also worth mentioning that the majority of the Combaticons cannot have their primary/secondary colors change. The reason for this is due to the way the color system works for this game. Attempting to blend a secondary color over a primary color would result in a really nasty white outline between the two colors. So I was forced to stick with a color diffuse texture in place of actual colors. They do, however, have unique colors coded so that their weapons blend with the rest of their body. Now, let's get on to Swindle himself. The head has gone completely unchanged, so we'll move down to the chest. Since his chest is largely unmirrored, I was able to pull off more of a diverse look than I did for the others. I even tried to mirror the asymmetrical camo seen on the hood in leg mode, and I think it adapted well enough. He's also got a nice scatter pattern across his back and some nice smaller spots on the top. He actually was originally the first character I finished, but he ended up receiving some substantial camo updates after I finished everybody else. So I'll show you some comparison shots after I cover the shoulders. The shoulders are probably my favorite part of robot mode. How the camo manages to go all the way around the shoulder while never being too overpowering or underwhelming truly is one of the best cases of camo work in this entire pack. As I said, I ended up completely redoing pretty much every section on this guy, as I found many sections of camo quite unsatisfying. For example, here is the original. Notice how there's an extremely ugly squiggle on the inside? Compare that to what he has now. See how much better that looks? I even added some additional spots near the lower sides, though you can see where some sections have stayed the same. It took quite a bit of effort to get these new camo jobs, but it was totally worth it in the end. Moving on to the arms, they also received quite a substantial update compared to the original design. The original was really, well, erratic. It was just a bunch of scrambled smudges scattered about with no real consistency at all. That, and it's just flat out ugly. This new take, however, far better. To be fair, it is mostly all the same camo samples, with a sizable portion taking up the bottom of the arm, which I originally left completely red beforehand, but the sample I reused here really was the only one that fit the entirety of the arm without coming across too weirdly. So, I can't really complain here. Moving down to the legs, which have also had a substantial change from the original design, which I don't think I have anymore. But the camo job he has now is much more satisfying overall and blends together quite beautifully. He's got a nice central camo spot that blends in with his purple knee pads, an aspect taken from the Amazon exclusive repaint. One of my favorite sections on him is the section right beneath his wheel. It blends together so beautifully. It is, dare I say, perfect. The rest of the camo on the rear and inner sections also balance together quite nicely too. He's even got a nice little spot of camo on his heel sections. So even though it took ages to finalize his redesign, I am more than thrilled with the final result. Well, that's all there is to say for robot mode. Let's roll over to vehicle mode. Swindle, transform! This has to be my personal favorite camo job for any of the vehicles in this pack. I'd literally call it perfect. There isn't too much, there isn't too little, and it all balances together quite naturally. If you look at the hood of the vehicle, you'll see a camo job quite similar to what you saw in robot mode. I wanted to make the design as consistent as possible between modes. I didn't exactly go overboard on it, so there's probably a few anomalies between designs, but overall I'm quite pleased with the design. Additionally, I did keep the original purple points seen on the original vehicle, as I thought it worked well with the G2 design. Yeah, all in all, I don't think this camo job could have turned out any better than it did. I absolutely love this thing. Okay, well, that's it for Swindle. Let's seal this deal and truck on over to Onslaught, who is my second favorite skin in the pack. Onslaught was the second to last character I finished, and he's primarily based on the actual G2 figure, with various adaptations made to accommodate the FOC design. I pretty much did his camo job from scratch, as there really are no recognizable vehicle parts in chest mode at all for me to go off of, so I didn't even try. Anyway, let's get up close for the goods. Onslaught's head, much like the original toys, is all black, with the exception of some silver around the face. The reason for that is that I didn't think a full black head would translate over well for the in-game model, so I left that one section of silver there to spice it up. What's weird is that the G2 Deluxe repaint had a solid purple head in the final release, though the promo shots had a full black one. I never got any of those figures myself, but that purple head was a really questionable choice. Moving down to the chest, it is primarily yellow, with various bits of camo scattered all about. One of my personal favorite sections of camo can be found on his upper side panels. It has this purple circle that perfectly covers the front sections there, and I couldn't be any more pleased with this section in particular. It's literally exactly what I wanted. I also gave him some solid purple panels below the previous ones to imitate the purple hip armor. He's also had his bat guns recolored to follow the same deco as seen on the original G2 figure, black for the cannons themselves, and purple for the shelling around them. He's even had his rear engine completely decolored to silver to blend with his other interior parts. I just thought that the colored engine added way too much color to the design, so I decided to omit it. Moving over to the shoulders, the bulk of the shoulder is yellow, but with one large section of camo taking up the lower paneling. This choice was based off the Amazon Deluxe repaint, which had a similar design for his shoulders. I also made both the supports for the wheel fully purple to spice up the whole design. The wheels were the last pieces I finished for him, and I'll be frank, I didn't even try and match the camo deco seen in chest mode. I pretty much did my own thing here. The wheels were especially tricky since their UV setup is pretty odd. Instead of being one single section for the entirety of the tread, it is instead mirrored in half, so whatever change you make to the front will be seen on the back. This proved difficult, but I somehow managed to get a decode that blended both halves of the tread with both rims. And even though it doesn't even remotely resemble what you see on Bruticus, I am happy with it. Next, we have the arms, which are pretty simple. Not a lot to write home about here, except for one key change. If you look at the outer side of his arm, you'll see a solid purple section there. Now, those who are familiar with Onslaught's design, you'll know there was originally an extremely large bulbous scratch there that I honestly never could stomach. So, with a little bit of creative effort, I completely colored over the thing and made it far less appalling. This is a detail I will be carrying over to all of my future Onslaught skins going forward. The camo job is honestly nothing too special. It does what it needs to do. I can't complain though. Anyway, closing off robot mode, we have the legs. The hips are solid purple, just like the original G2 figure, along with the thighs, which are fully black. All the black sections on him have a slightly stronger spec than the other two colors, which gives him a bit more of a metallic shine in those areas. Then we have the rest of his legs, which are fully yellow, with some of my personal favorite camo jobs that I have done for these skins. You look all around his knees and you are never overwhelmed nor underwhelmed by camo. A quite difficult balance to strike, but one that I happily managed to accomplish. And they blend together with the wheels pretty well too. Well, that's all for robot mode. Let's turn over to vehicle mode. Onslaught, transform! So, once again, the camo job is pretty much all from scratch here, though I did carry over a few key bits seen on his chest in robot mode to the front of the vehicle. I also gave him a couple solid purple bits on the front, just to spice things up a bit. Moving up top, we have his main guns, which followed the same design that you saw in robot mode. The cannons themselves are black, but the armor surrounding them is purple, just like the design you see on the original G2 figure. Nothing else too special to mention for the rest of the camo on the front, but if we check the back, we have what is my favorite part of this guy. Everything on the back just looks great. You've got that nice oval section beneath the cannons, that wide stream on the rear left section, and he's got this gorgeous half stream going diagonally across. Oh, it's too good. As you can see, I again took the color out of Onslaught's rear engine, as I found that leaving it colored was just a bit too overpowering. As a small bonus, I even colored these intersections behind his wheels purple, just for a little bit of a spice up. Well, that's pretty much Onslaught in a nutshell. Let's tank on to our next character, Brawl, who is probably my least favorite of the pack. Now, don't get me wrong, I am quite pleased with how the final camo job turned out, but there was just one aspect that I could never get past for him, and that was the head. In all the reference I found for G2 Brawl, his head is always solid purple, and I'm not too thrilled on how it looks in general, but that is a consistent trait of his, so it seemed wrong to try and change it up. Now, I did try several other color combinations, but none of them looked quite right. So despite the fact that I didn't particularly like the solid purple head in general, I could not find any other deco that looked better. So for that reason, Brawl is just always going to look a bit off to me. With that said though, as you can see, his visor has been recolored to red to match what is seen with the original toy, and there isn't much more to say than that. So, moving down to the chest, we have what I would call a satisfactory camo job. One of my favorite camo spots on him is that large purple section in the middle of his back. It just really spices up the whole look for me. Now, there's a couple interesting tidbits about Brawl's chest to mention, starting with his cannons, which, first of all, have had their barrels recolored to gray to match what you see in leg mode, but in addition to that, by default, his cannons are not mirrored properly. So by default, the camouflage you see on the right cannon is going to be facing the same direction as the left one. You'll likely won't notice this by default, since Brawl's cannons have no distinct marks in the vanilla game, but with the addition of camo on the skin, it becomes quite apparent. So that issue has been fixed, though you'll have to put on the optional UI lobby file if you want to use it properly in private matches. Additionally, I fixed a strange anomaly that can be found on Brawl's clavicle sections. If you look at the diffuse portion of the texture, you can see that it's almost as if some details weren't baked in somehow. It's very odd. In all my experience with textures, I have never once come across an occurrence like this. Fortunately, the diffuse was the only texture missing these pieces, and I was able to snag the missing details from the spec mask and blend it with the diffuse portion quite easily. So thankfully, that detail has also been fixed and will be carried over to any future skins. Moving off from the chest and over to the shoulders, they are pretty straightforward. The tread sections up top are fully purple, mimicking what you see on the original G2 toy, and he has a few small spots of camo on the green section. Again, pretty straightforward. Moving down to the arms, this was probably one of the most difficult sections to find a good camo job for, and even now, I'm still not 100% happy with it. If you look at the design from the front, looks good. If you look at it from the back, looks good. But when you look at it from the side, it looks kinda funky, doesn't it? Yeah, I guess I had to pay the price of having it look bad from one side and having it look good on the rest. So, not the best result possible, but it is an acceptable price to be paid. I will also say that Brawl has had the darker gray sections on his arms brightened up so that they blend with the rest of the arms. And while G2 Brawl's arms are supposed to be full green, adding that purple section there along the side seemed to be the only way I could make everything blend together properly. Closing off robot mode, we have the legs, which have had the entire upper hip and thigh sections recolored to purple to imitate what is seen on the original G2 toy. Included in that is the front crotch armor, which is no longer red, but has now been brightened up to be compatible with other color-based sections. The same can also be said for his knee pads, which were also originally red, but are now colored green with some lovely camo spots that wrap around to the inside. And this is where I have to address an issue with Brawl's model. He is missing the inside armor on his right knee. Yeah. Somehow the developers missed this one spot, and it is quite an irritating oversight. You can even see it in all of his marketing photos. It's weird that Brawl seems to be cursed with having issues with his legs, because the Transformers the Game model has an issue as well. Fortunately, there is a way to fix this, but it's still weird that Brawl has had a knee issue happen to him twice. That aside though, the tread sections have again been colored fully purple to mimic what is seen on the original G2 toy. And on the back of the leg, you'll see another one of my favorite camo samples on the top of that back spire there. It wraps around the entire section so perfectly and complements his design incredibly well. Well, that's all there is to cover for robot mode. Let's crunch down into tank mode. G2 Brawl, transform! So here's an interesting little tidbit about FOC Brawl's tank mode. While it is a port from War for Cybertron, he has none of the substantial scratching included in his color masks. In fact, he really has no scratching at all. So I ported some of the scratching over from the War mask and used it to add some more depth for my main texture. Additionally, the tank outside multiplayer has had its default metallic level reduced to 0 to match with what you see in robot mode. Yeah, weirdly enough, Brawl's robot mode has no metallic by default, but his tank is set to full blast. I think that he was supposed to be fully metallic in robot mode, but it was apparently forgotten. Regardless, for the sake of keeping his camo job cleaned and visible, the metallic level is disabled for all instances of the campaign, as well as escalation. Moving on from that, we have a camo job that is pretty straightforward. Not too much, and not too little. Quite a pleasant balance. His treads are again all purple, to mimic what you see on the original G2 toy, and they look mighty nice. He has also had all those front points below his guns recolored to purple for a nice bunch of spice. And finally, we have some additional work for his artillery mode. The legs themselves don't have a lot of camo, only like a small bit near the feet. These legs actually use the same textures as the Autobot Enforcer. Fortunately, however, they are unique and will not override any of the textures used by the Enforcer itself. Not a whole lot to mention here otherwise. Most of his legs are green, but with a few additional spots of purple, mainly within the joints themselves. But it works well enough. And that is all for Brawl. Let's boost over to Blast Off, who is probably my fourth favorite skin in the mod, as his camo job came together quite nicely. So let's get right to it, starting with the head. Not a lot to mention here. The only changes he's received here are red optics in place of his purple default ones. So, let's not waste any more time on that, and move down to his chest, which has some interesting tidbits to talk about. First and foremost was the decision to deliberately deviate from the original G2 figure, and that the chest is not fully purple, and is instead primarily white, with purple taking up the lower and rear sections. The reason for this change was simple. I didn't like how a full purple chest looked. I actually did a full-on test for that design, and found it far too off-putting. And considering how little purple you actually see on Blast Off's field mode, I decided an adaptation was in order. As I said, the lower and rear sections are primarily all purple, but I also colored the upper chest piece purple as well. His camo job is fairly on the simple side. He's got a couple splotches on both sides of his chest, with another small one underneath. Then he has the wild scatter job on his upper chest armor that I really like, and he even has a few small splotches on the rear of the armor. A couple more points to mention is that the central thruster on his back has had his color masks disabled and recolored to match what you see on the rear of the shoulders. I honestly don't get why they went the colored route, but that is probably a change I'll be carrying over to any of my future skins. Oh, and finally, I made those rear lowered side panels dark gray, similar to what you find on his legs. I guess that was done to mimic his wings from the G2 figure, even though he kind of already has some wings. But that is all for the chest. The shoulders are pretty simple. Just a nice scattered camo job across the armor. Nothing too special to mention here. The arms are much the same way, though this is probably another one of my favorite camo sections for all the characters in this pack. It just came together so simply and balances out beautifully. Not too much, not too little, perfectly balanced. Finally, we have the legs, which are quite on the simple side. You will notice that there are no camo spots to be found anywhere on the legs. This is a direct reference to the original G2 figure's packaging art, in which both his thighs and leg thrusters have no camo, similar to what you see on his gun mounts. I did give him purple knee pads though, as I needed some purple somewhere to spice up the design, and also the entirety of his hips are purple, which is in reference to his fully purple chest that he originally had. And that's about all there is to show for robot mode. Let's now boost over to vehicle mode. Blast off, transform! Vehicle mode is simple but sweet. He's got a beautifully balanced camo job that looks positively smashing. One of my favorite sections is that side panel just before the nose. Oh, it complements the design so wonderfully. Admittedly, I didn't follow the G2 game design as much as I could have, but the camo you see on the central stabilizer is the exact same splotch you see on G2 Bruticus himself. Everything else was pretty much strung together until it looked good. It even has a few spots of camo on the belly of the jet. Pretty rough as it is straight up mirrored, but it worked out well enough. And that's all there is to cover for Blast Off. Let's close it off by whirling to our final character, Vortex, who is another of my top favorites. He also took the most effort to complete compared to everyone else. This mainly applies to vehicle mode, but still applies somewhat to robot mode as well. So, there are a couple key points to mention regarding Vortex. First and foremost, he was primarily based upon the G2 Deluxe repaint included in the Amazon exclusive set, mainly for the chest and legs. I wanted him to have a bit more metallic shine on him compared to the others, so the spec is a bit stronger compared to everyone else. The camo job was again primarily done from scratch with the exception for the backpack, which I'll get into more detail in a bit. Additionally, Vortex is the only character that still uses his color masks on some sections of his robot mode. Those being the head, chest, thighs, and a small section on the backpack. I wanted to keep him rather light on the camo side, but more ended up on the legs than I had planned. But it ended up looking so good that I decided to fly with it. Anyway, let's run down him, starting with the head. Not a lot to mention here, though his visor has been recolored from yellow to a nice bright red, and he's had two uncolored sections on his faceplate and forehead made to be purple as well. Weirdly enough, I never had any issue with Vortex's head being fully purple as I did with Brawl. I guess he just pulled off the design better. Anyway, moving down to the chest, it is primarily purple, with the yellow chest sections around his inner John vents recolored to blend with the rest of the design, and he has a small patch of silver near the top of the chest that mimics what you see on the G2 Deluxe repaint. The shoulders only have 3 spots of camo on them, and I left these secondary colored sections on the arm up part as I thought they complemented the design quite nicely. The arms took several tries to get right. I ended up trying several different camo jobs before I settled on this one. It is generally pretty simple, though the camo job you see on his fin there, that is a direct duplication from the one you see in arm mode. I really wanted to be as consistent as I could between modes, so I figured it was wise to throw this in. Otherwise, there's nothing else too special to mention. The legs, as I said, have the upper thigh sections using the secondary colors with an absolutely gorgeous camo job sprinkled throughout the rest of the design. One of my absolute favorites, as a matter of fact. I also added a few solid purple sections down there just to spice up the design a bit. Finally, we come to the backpack, the most involved part of Vortex's robot mode. There's actually a lot of inconsistencies between robot, vehicle, and arm mode regarding the rotors. The default robot mode has his rotors as pure silver, whereas in vehicle mode they have some red accents, and in arm mode they're full-on yellow. The rotor hub is also red in robot mode and tan in vehicle and arm mode. There's quite a few more anomalies, but suffice to say, it was incredibly inconsistent. So for my take on G2 Vortex, I wanted to match the arm mode as closely as possible. what I did was, first of all, override all the yellow sections so that they could be colored along with the rest of the backpack, and then I took the effort of manually copying the camo job as seen on the rotors and applying them to robot mode. This was by far the most difficult part of adapting his design. I even went as far as to match the sections that you never even see inside the backpack. There are some unavoidable distinctions due to mesh differences, but overall the robot camo job mirrors the armor design almost perfectly. Of course, that was just for robot mode. Vehicle mode was a whole nother story. Let's check that out next. Vortex, transform! Okay, so Vortex's helicopter mode was by far the most involved skin in this entire pack. You see, since his arm mode is almost a spitting image of his helicopter mode, I had a lot of reference for his vehicle's camo job. So that meant I had to manually take every single spot of camo from that design and translate it over to this. 90% of what you see here is a mimic to the design from arm mode. There's probably only a couple of locations that received some scratch camo jobs, and those are only for areas that are not seen in arm mode. Thankfully though, the majority of his UV maps matched up between modes, so it made the transfer a lot simpler than it could have been. Here's a side-by-side to show you just how similar the two modes are. Yeah, rotors especially have to be my favorite part of this guy. They just translated so beautifully. One of the only sections I couldn't get an exact match on was the sides of his tail. The arm version wrapped around the entire tail, whereas the vehicle had its tail mirrored, so I was only able to get one side of the tail. So I went for the bigger spot of camo for a more filled out look. One of the few sections that did receive custom camo additions is on the top of the main gun, and the other on the lower side pieces above the engines. But I think both translated over quite nicely. And I'd say that's a wrap. Yeah, again, all in all, this has been a mod I've wanted to complete for years, and I don't think I could be any happier with the final product. If you haven't already, go and download the mod in the description. It is compatible for both Fall and Rise, so you can use them pretty much anywhere the Combaticons are located. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy.